Okay, let's unpack something truly fascinating today. Have you ever wondered how history gets written, or maybe more importantly, unwritten? How certain events are, hammered into our memory while others just seem to fade away?
It's a really vexing trait, isn't it? Especially when it makes us, as the source says, easy prey for liars. What we're getting into today is exactly that. It's a period where the law as a child was born, you could say, and with it, a whole new kind of memory was forged.
Absolutely. Our deep dive today takes us right into those turbulent early years of the Soviet Union, specifically 1917 to 1922. We're exploring the really shocking, often contradictory evolution of its legal system. And our main source here is an excerpt from the GULAG Archipelago, Part 1, Chapter 8. So we're looking at those foundational principles, the ones that guided justice when there weren't really any law, it's just this idea of revolutionary conscience.
Right. Our mission really is to probe some of the charred ruins of that time, to see how legal theory, raw political need, and just brutal reality all kind of got tangled together. You'll hear details that honestly challenge the usual story, revealing some surprising facts about a system in its most raw, formative stage.
Yeah, get ready for maybe a few aha moments, because what we're about to uncover about this period of bold legality is probably far from what you might expect. So as we start digging into this bold legality, we find something striking right away. The memory of those very early Soviet trials was, well, it seems systematically erased. Our sources tell us that, most people might remember the later big show trials, Bukharin's, Viev,
Hmm.
those get repeated. But public trials, they were happening right after the October Revolution in 1918.
In quantities, the source says, and in many different tribunals. And this was even before there were either laws or codes.
So what does this initial chaos tell us about the early Soviet state?
Well, what's really fascinating here is how quickly this idea of extrajudicial reprisal took hold.
Meaning actions outside the courts.
Exactly. Taken without trial, bypassing the court altogether. And this was largely driven by the Cheka, the secret police. They're described as a fledgling whose beak had not yet hardened. But they were encouraged, warmed by figures like Trotsky and Zinoviev. They explicitly saw terror as a powerful means of policy. This wasn't some unfortunate side effect. It was a deliberate tool.
And the methods they used, pretty stark. In 1918, there was this Chekist in Ryazan, Stelmach. He had people sentenced to death, shot right in the courtyard during the day, so other prisoners could watch. Yeah. It was only later, the source notes, that the custom developed of hiding executions in cellars under cover of night and shooting victims in the back of the head.
That's a chilling progression, isn't it? From public spectacle to hidden liquidation.
It certainly is. And to get a sense of the scale, consider the figures from M. Latsis, a top Chekist himself. Well, for just a year and a half, 1918 and half of 1919, and only in 20 central provinces, the Cheka shot 8,389 people without trial. Yeah. 8,389. Just like that.
And arrested 87,000 total. Now, if you connect this to the bigger picture, compare it to Tsarist Russia. Over 80 years, from 1826 to 1906, only 894 people were executed by the state.
80 years versus a year and a half in just 20 provinces.
Exactly. Even if you look at the notorious Stolypin reaction, 1906, 1907, maybe 1,310 executed in 1906, the total from 1826 to 1906 around 3,419. The post-revolutionary terror, just from the Cheka in those 20 provinces, was at least 3 times more intense. And remember, those Cheka numbers, they don't even include executions ordered by the courts that did exist. It shows an immediate, almost exponential jump in state violence.
So while these extrajudicial killings were rampant, it's important, as you said, to remember the formal courts did exist alongside them. You had the people's courts, circuit courts, revolutionary tribunals. But the people's courts, initially, they couldn't even impose the death penalty. Their maximum sentences were, frankly, laughable. Up to 2 years until July 1918, then 5, and only hitting 10 years by 1922.
Right. And what's also striking is the lack of records from these tribunals. They often just disappeared, likely due to deliberate destruction by people interested in having such material disappear.
Which brings us to the question, who exactly were the targets of all this? The extrajudicial and the judicial?
Well, the sources are very clear on this. It wasn't just the obvious enemies. You did not have to be a white officer, a senator, a landowner, a monk, a cadet, an SR, or an anarchist in order to get your bullet.
So not just political opponents or the old elite?
No. Even just having soft, white, uncalloused hands alone were sufficient. It suggests your social class or just the appearance of not being a manual laborer could be enough. And then there were the peasant uprisings, rampant between 1918 and 1921. The source mentions 344 suppressed in just 1.5 years in those same 20 provinces.
But they weren't called peasant uprisings, were they?
No, officially they were branded kulak revolts. Kulak was this derogatory term for supposedly wealthy peasants, used to demonize them and justify cracking down. It basically denied the reality of widespread peasant resistance against the regime.
Okay, so let's get into the guiding principles of this new revolutionary law. You mentioned Krylenko, the supreme accuser. He had some pretty defining things to say, didn't he?
He certainly did. He declared, a tribunal is not the kind of court in which fine points of jurisprudence and clever stratagems are to be restored. Basically, forget the old legal traditions.
We are creating a new law and new ethical norms. That's quite a statement.
It is. And even more chillingly, he said, the concept of guilt is an old bourgeois concept which has now been uprooted.
Guilt itself is irrelevant. What does that even mean for a legal system?
Well, if you look at the implications, Krylenko stated it outright. A tribunal is an organ of the class struggle of the workers directed against their enemies and must act from the point of view of the interests of the revolution.
So justice is purely about political goals.
Pretty much. Evaluation based on class expediency. His words. You can exist only if it's expedient for the working class. And it gets even stranger. They aim to protect not only against the past, but also against the future, meaning they could sentence people based on what they might do.
Sentencing potential threats. That's a complete departure from any traditional idea of law.
Absolutely. It's moving justice from objective standards to just being an instrument of political will.
And Krylenko himself, the man saying all this, described as the supreme accuser, known for just blurting out his frank opinions about the defendants. Apparently, he'd threatened someone just based on how they smiled.
Yes, quite the figure. And on a more practical level, maybe disturbingly practical, a bribery was just everywhere in these early judicial bodies, even inside the Cheka.
So your fate could literally depend on whether your family could pay up.
It seems so, according to the source. A very murky picture.
Okay, let's turn to some specific cases now. They really illustrate how this revolutionary conscience actually worked. First up, March 1918. This case involving the newspaper Russia Vedomosti.
Right, a well-known professorial newspaper. It's Crime. It published an article by Savinkov, which just noted the fact that Lenin, Natanson, and co. arrived in Russia via Berlin.
Which was true, but politically inconvenient. How did the editor defend it?
P.V. Yegorov, the editor, argued it was an article by a major political figure, and it wasn't slanderous, just factual reporting. Krylenko's response was telling.
He didn't prosecute for slander?
No. He said the newspaper itself was on trial for attempting to influence people's minds. His question was essentially, why would any newspaper dare have such a purpose?
Influencing minds is the crime. That sets a chilling precedent right from the start.
Absolutely. It shows the immediate suppression of any independent thought, any narrative challenging the regimes. This newspaper, it had been around since 1864, survived harsh Tsarist censorship. But the Revolutionary Tribunal ordered closed down forever.
And the editor, Yegorov.
He got only 3 months of solitary. Sounds light, maybe. But the source adds, if the old man managed to survive, he would be imprisoned again, and many more times too.
So not just punishing the act, but marking the person for continuous persecution.
Exactly. The core insight is they weren't just punishing actions, but the very intent to shape public opinion, a clear signal.
Okay, next case, April 1918. This one shows the corruption inside the revolutionary system itself.
Yeah, this one's quite something. A gold speculator gets arrested. His wife tries to ransom him, offers a huge bribe.
Oh, huge.
60,000 rubles, a fortune then. And who gets caught taking it? 3 interrogators from the Moscow Revolutionary Tribunal, Krylenko's own associates.
Wow. So how did Krylenko handle his own people being corrupt?
It's fascinating. He didn't frame it as individual greed. Instead, he blamed their bourgeois backgrounds. One was a professor's son, another an official son. The third published low-quality literature.
So it wasn't their fault, it was their past. Sort of ideological impurity.
Precisely. The tribunal itself was initially lenient, sentencing them to just 6 months. Krylenko wasn't having it. He used the authority of a higher body, the All-Russian Central Executive Committee, to slap 10-year sentences on the interrogators and 5 years on the lawyer involved.
A much harsher sentence imposed from above.
Yes. The source calls it an unfortunate trial that could not but undermine faith in the sanctity of the tribunal among the masses. The key takeaway seems to be that even when faced with blatant internal corruption, the response was to reframe it ideologically and project an image of revolutionary severity, even if imposed top-down.
Right. Now this next case, February 1919. F.M. Kozyrev. This one feels like it goes to another level entirely.
It really does. Kozyrev and his group were found siphoning enormous amounts of money, 70,000 up to 1,000,000 rubles from the Eastern Front Supply Commission.
And not just embezzlement, right?
No, also engaging in orgies with nurses, acquiring fancy property, basically living large on stolen funds during a civil war.
Okay, so surely they face severe punishment.
You would think. But immediately after this was uncovered, all 4 of them were invited to form the Control and Auditing Collegium of the VCHK, the Cheka.
The auditing body, the one supposed to oversee legality within the Czech.
Exactly. A body second only to Solzhenitsyn, the head of the Cheka himself. They were given the power to verify the legality of the actions of all the remaining organs of the Cheka.
How is that even possible? Someone caught red-handed embezzling gets put in charge of oversight.
It's baffling by any normal standard. And their lifestyle didn't change. Kozyrev apparently even stole silver spoons and glassware from the Cheka headquarters. Their new scheme involved an informer, this woman Uspenskaya. She started as a peace raid informant, taking a cut, but quickly became a party member and interrogator herself.
And what was this scheme?
Using her position to identify wealthy arrestees, fish with golden roe, as the source puts it, and then extorting huge ransoms from their relatives. Demands of 600,000 rubles, secret meetings, the works. Until another attorney, Yakula, exposed them again.
This is incredible. But the truly shocking part, for me at least reading this, was Kozyrev's background before the revelation.
Ah, yes. Multiple convictions. Murder, strangling an old woman, attempted murder trying to kill his own father, killing a comrade for his passport, swindling.
A career criminal, essentially. How did the Cheka leadership react when this came out?
They basically dismissed it entirely, claimed those were convictions by courts of the bourgeois and landowners, and therefore did not merit being noticed in our new society.
So crimes committed under the old regime simply didn't count?
Apparently not, if you were useful to the new one. Even Solzhenitsyn himself testified passionately in defense of the totally innocent Kozyrev, calling him an iron cheekist with high moral, revolutionary, and professional qualities.
Totally innocent Kozyrev, the convicted murderer and embezzler. This really twists the whole idea of morality and legality.
It absolutely does, and it gives a profound insight into this revolutionary legality. Krylenko himself, oddly enough, had a moment where he actually praised something from the Tsarist system trial by jury.
He did. That seems inconsistent.
It was, and his comrades immediately corrected him, insisting that criminal convictions under the laws of a capitalist society do not, in our eyes, constitute a fact branding a person. The whole Kozyrev affair became this huge internal party struggle. Krylenko ended up having to fight to prevent the trial of Kozyrev from turning into a trial of the Cheka itself.
Damage control.
Big time. In the end, Krylenko demanded the annihilation of the informer Uspenskaya, bluntly stating she knew too much.
And the outcome?
Both Kozyrev and Uspenskaya were shot. It wasn't about justice in any recognizable sense. It was about power, protecting the Cheka's image, and eliminating inconvenient people.
Okay, so we've seen corruption and the dismissal of past crimes. Let's shift focus slightly. How did this class expediency apply to fundamental freedoms? Our next case is from January 1920, involving church figures.
Right. This involved prominent people like A.D. Samarin. He was actually a former Tsarist official, chief procurator, who had tried to increase the church's independence from the Tsar, and Professor Kurochkin. They were put on trial for forming something called the Council of United Parishes.
And what were their supposed crimes?
Well, recruiting an unarmed voluntary guard to protect Patriarch Tikhon, the head of the Orthodox Church, planning to ring church bells as an alarm if he was in danger.
Seems like defensive measures. What else?
Petitioning the government, the Council of People's Commissars asking for relief from the desecration of the churches.
Petitioning the government is a crime.
In this context, yes. It was framed as a direct challenge. The charges also included resisting the seizure of church property, actions labeled as discrediting the local authorities. Patriarch Tikhon himself was circulating these underground samizdat messages, talking about the annihilation of the innocents. There were reports of officials smoking in churches, spitting into holy relics.
Like St. Savastorozeski's skull. That's deeply provocative.
Extremely. So Krylenko demanded the death penalty for Samarin and Kurochkin. His argument was that even if the immediate threat was gone, a purge of the old turncoat leaders is required by revolutionary necessity. And he prophetically added that the recent abolition of the death penalty wasn't decided once and for all for the entire period of Soviet rule.
Hinting it could come back any time. What happened to them?
They were sentenced to be shot. However, the sentences were later commuted to time in concentration camps. Other defendants got prison terms, but the case clearly shows how any independent organization, even peaceful religious activity, was seen as a counter-revolutionary threat needing to be crushed.
It's a direct assault on religious freedom, framed entirely through political expediency.
Precisely.
All right, our final case study, August 1920, the Tactical Center. This involved intellectuals, the intelligentsia, and we know Lenin's view on them.
Yes, Lenin famously called the bulk of the Russian intelligentsia not the nation's brains, but shit, which certainly sets a grim tone for their trial. There were 28 defendants.
What exactly was the Tactical Center? Was it an actual organization plotting against the state?
Not really. The source emphasizes their crime wasn't action, but inaction. Krylenko would really hammer this point home later. The Tactical Center wasn't some formal group with statutes or membership dues. It was more like a loose network of people who used to meet and undertook to familiarize themselves with one another's point of view.
About what?
About what the state structure should be after the fall of the Soviet regime. Basically thinking about alternatives, what the source calls the study of the alternative possibility.
Just discussing possibilities. What was the evidence against them?
Things like letters discussing disagreements with the white General Denikin on crucial issues, the peasant question, the Jewish question. They were advocating for democracy rather than dictatorship.
So, disagreeing with the whites, advocating democracy, how is that a crime against the Reds?
Because any thought outside the Bolshevik line was suspect. Their most heinous acts, according to the prosecution, were writing things, books, memos, projects. They were experts in law, finance, economics, education. But their work wasn't based on the writings of Lenin, Trotsky, or Bukharin. That was the core issue.
Thinking for themselves, essentially. What did Krylenko demand?
Death. For all of them. He called them allies of the black generals and hirelings of European imperialism. The tribunal initially agreed, sentenced them to death.
But like the churchmen, it was commuted.
Yes, later commuted to concentration camp until the end of the Civil War. But the initial death sentence for simply discussing alternatives is key. And this case really crystallizes that terrifying expansion of what constituted a crime. Krylenko's logic was stark and absolute. During the Civil War, not only is any kind of action against Soviet power a crime, but the fact of inaction is also criminal.
Inaction is criminal. How does that work?
It meant, for example, that intellectuals who merely thought about how to safeguard a city if the anti-Bolshevik General Yudenich captured it were deemed criminals because they weren't actively out there dying in battle for the Soviets.
Just thinking about a contingency plan is a crime.
Yes. And it went further. Even people who knew about these discussions and kept silent meaning, they didn't report them, didn't write denunciations, they were considered criminals too. It even extended to basic human kindness. A member of the political Red Cross, which tried to help prisoners, was implicated just for raising money for inmates in the Butyrki prison.
Providing aid to prisoners became criminal association.
Essentially, yes. The state demanded total, active, unwavering loyalty. Anything less, even silence or basic charity towards perceived enemies, was criminalized.
And the outcomes for minor figures in this?
Pretty severe. Someone like Alexandra Tachanina, whose main role was apparently just attending to the samovar during these meetings making tea, she received 3 years in a concentration camp.
3 years for making tea at a discussion group.
And Sava Morozov, a wealthy industrialist who had actually funded the Bolsheviks before the revolution, he got 3 years just for giving money to help these intellectuals, although he was released on probation. It really shows you, as the source says, how the sun of our freedom began to grow, how this initial idea of revolutionary justice spiraled into total thought control.
So wrapping this all up, what are the big takeaways for us today? Looking back at this period, 1917, 1922, this deep dive reveals such a rapid and frankly brutal rewriting of what justice even means.
It really does. Law, human value itself, redefined almost overnight. These principles of revolutionary conscience and class expediency, they just swept away established legal norms. Thought, association, even, as we saw, inaction became crimes.
It's a stark illustration, isn't it? How quickly a society can pivot from legal frameworks we might recognize to a system where raw power and ideology just dictate everything.
Absolutely. The deliberate suppression of memory, forgetting those early trials, the constant relabeling of dissent, like calling peasant uprisings kulak revolts, and the systematic removal of anyone deemed inexpedient. It's a powerful lesson in how fragile rights can be.
And the dangers of unchecked authority, clearly.
It's a story of a legal system being built, really, on the fly, full of shocking contradictions, but driven by this chilling determination to crush any perceived opposition, completely disregarding any fine points of jurisprudence.
So it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it?
I think so. If history, if memory is so easily manipulated and the very definition of justice can be twisted so quickly, how do we discern truth today, especially when powerful narratives are constantly being hammered into our brains? And maybe, how vigilant do we really need to be about the fundamental principles that are supposed to underpin our own systems of justice? Something to definitely mull over.